日本史学習に最高にもってこいのサイトサムライアーカイブスポッドキャストへようこそ。美しい自然にあふれてる縄文時代から波乱万丈な幕末まで全時代を網羅して日本史の隅から隅まで一緒に語り合いましょう。では早速日本史の世界へ。
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Samurai Archives podcast. This is Chris, and today we're continuing the story of Sengoku Daimyo Mori Motonari. Before we get started, as always, please check out patreon.com/samuraiarchives to see how you can help out the podcast and what the podcast can do for you. And a big shout out, as always, to the patrons. You guys and girls keep me doing what I'm doing, and your help is always appreciated. And don't forget, if you haven't done so already, please feel free to rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen. Okay, so I left you with quite a story last time, so I kind of feel like I should recap. And if you haven't listened to part 1, this would be the time to do so. Anyway, the Mori clan during Motonari's early life and up to the time he took over control of the clan was being pulled between the Amako clan and the Ouchi clan. Through some strategic side-switching, Motonari was able to prevent his clan's destruction and was able to build enough of a power base that he was beginning to become a legitimate local power. So when we left Motonari, he was in the process of cleaning up the last vestiges of Ouchi Yoshitaka's supporters in his lands and building alliances with local warrior houses. And when I say alliances, I basically mean that Motonari was the leader and all the other clans were getting in line behind him. Sue Harukata, for his part, was in the process of making good on his promises to Otomo Soren by placing Ouchi Yoshinaga in nominal charge of the Ouchi clan. If you remember from last episode, Sue Harukata had rebelled against the Ouchi, killed Ouchi Yoshitaka, and slaughtered most of the imperial court, including a gang of notable figures, including Takeda Shingen's father-in-law. Which I think last episode I misspoke and called him Shingen's father, but it was his wife's father, but close enough. I haven't looked into what this mass slaughter did to the imperial court, but my guess is that the Miyoshi clan probably made out really well because of it. But anyway, now with Ouchi Yoshinaga installed as the head of the clan, everything within the clan hierarchy was returned to the status quo. This episode really highlights the corporate nature of the clan structure in Japan. We did an episode on this before, but the fact that Harukata ousted the lord while preserving the clan structure shows how embedded in the culture the clan structure really was. Look at it from the point of view of a corporate takeover. The old CEO was ousted, and the board basically put in a puppet CEO in the form of Yoshinaga. This goes to show that the corporate name, so to speak, is more important than the people behind it. The Ouchi clan as a whole is more important than the leader. The people who are invested in the clan, the generals and vassals, will preserve the clan structure at all costs, even at the cost of the lord of the clan if necessary. So when Harukata started plotting, the ace in his sleeve was the fact that he would be installing a blood member of the Ouchi clan, Otomo Soren's son. And for the clan members, aside from the top leadership and their allies, clan hierarchy and their place in it was preserved. There's a quid pro quo relationship between the clan leaders and the vassals and associated clans. This was the motivation for a lot of daimyo to go out and campaign in the first place, to both bleed off military power of their vassals and to be able to provide lands and castles to the vassals. The vassals, for their part, support the lord with certain expectations, and you subvert those expectations at your own risk. If you as daimyo aren't providing for your vassals, you get replaced by someone who does. And this runs contrary to what people generally seem to believe about the samurai and daimyo relationship. For whatever reason, and it probably has to do with Bushido, the nonsense that is Bushido anyway, people seem to think that as a samurai, you were loyal to your lord to a fault, and that's definitely not true. You were loyal to a fault as long as the daimyo was holding up his end of the bargain. It's not a one-sided deal. Even in the cases where an outside daimyo attacks or threatens a smaller clan, in a lot of cases the bigger clan simply replaces the current head with one of their own and preserves the clan structure. For the vassals of that smaller clan, effectively the only thing that really changes is who is in charge and where the big picture clan loyalties lie, and as long as the new head continues to provide quid pro quo, everyone falls into line. The clan hierarchy and structure are preserved for all involved, so really it's just a new boss, same as the old boss type of situation. When the former head of the Kikukawa clan was replaced by Motonari's son Motoharu, nothing else really changed from middle management on down, so like I said, it's like getting a new CEO. Sure, there's some big picture changes, but day-to-day stuff for the grunts will be pretty much the same. This also contrasts with how Motonari actually had more leeway than the typical daimyo. Of his 3 oldest sons, 2 were installed as the head of their own clan, and his oldest son was in line to rule the Mori. Motonari had made his sons essentially daimyo in their own right, so they didn't actually have to rely on him anymore for rewards or wait eagerly or nervously for handouts. And they had solid family ties, so they didn't rely on the tit-for-tat type structure that most daimyo and vassals find themselves in. And other Mori children were seeded into other clans of Aki province like the Shishido, so at least in the case of the Mori, there were a lot of blood ties to their vassals. So that's really all to say. Over the previous 30 years or so, Motonari had set up a solid clan foundation that didn't rely on the delicate balance of vassal needs versus clan needs. Of course, there were corollary vassal clans like the Kumagai, Hiraga, and others, but Motonari's power base was built firmly on the shoulders of his family. So you can see the power and flexibility this brought. At the end of the day, it's loyal manpower that a daimyo needed, and having a lot of sons, and in particular sons who headed up their own clans, was key to this. Not to mention daughters that he could hand out like prizes at the county fair to shore up relations with the local clans. But let's get back to the issue at hand. Motonari let things sit with the Ouchi, paying lip service to the new lord, Harukata and Yoshinaga, and was content to keep things status quo between them. And so Motonari immediately started attacking supporters of the dead Ouchi Yoshitaka in Aki province. Once Aki was firmly under his control, Motonari contented himself with expanding the Mori presence in Bingo province and basically stayed out of Ouchi affairs completely at this point. That was at least until 1554, when Yoshimi Masayori, a local power in Iwami province, raised the flag of revolt against Sue Harukata. Motonari then dropped all pretenses and broke from Sue himself, prompting Harukata to put together a large army of as many as 30,000 men. Even though Motonari had spent the last few years consolidating power, he was really barely able to rally half as many troops. Although even with his sizable numerical disadvantage, he fared pretty well in the early stages of their conflict, defeating Sue troops at Oshikihata in the summer. And of course, Motonari dug deep into his bag of tricks and bribed a number of Sue's men, helping to balance out the odds. And for his part, Sue made no major moves against Koriyama Castle, and with the end of the year's campaigning season, Motonari was allowed some temporary breathing space. Breathing space that lasted less than a year because in the early summer of 1555, Sue was again threatening and Motonari was still unable to match Sue Harukata's resources. And at this point, the danger of his retainers and allies deserting the Mori became a real possibility. This led Motonari to adopt a bold and unorthodox scheme. His plan involved an island strategically located off the Aki coast called Miyajima, home to the Itsukushima Shrine, and a place where combat had been traditionally avoided on religious grounds. By tradition, neither birth nor death was allowed to pollute the island, and Motonari was going to break with that tradition. Now, you might recognize Miyajima as the place with the shrine that has the massive red torii gate in the ocean. It's a pretty iconic place. Anyway, Motonari came up with a plan to deal with Sue Harukata around this island. For Miyajima to be a viable base of operations, Sakurao Castle, the nearest fort on the mainland to Miyajima, would also have to be held. If Sakurao were to fall, any army on Miyajima risked being cut off, because Sakurao was an excellent staging point for an invasion. And it's here that I want to step back for a minute and bring your attention to Mori Motonari not just as a master strategist, but straight-up master manipulator who had an uncanny grasp of human psychology. Usually it's mentioned in books about Motonari that he's wily or crafty or whatever, but numerous times in his life he was able to manipulate his enemies right into inescapable traps. And his manipulation of Sue Harukata was his masterstroke. Motonari realized that if he could trick Sue Harukata into taking Miyajima, the Mori could then leverage Sakurao Castle, effectively cutting him off from the mainland. And this is a perfect example of the sort of trickery Motonari was known for. Motonari immediately gave official order that Miyajima was to be occupied and had Miyao Castle thrown up on the island as an enticing target near the Itsukushima Shrine on the northwest of the island, in the center of a 30-meter hill known as Yogai-san, facing the mainland. And for any castle nerds out there, Miyao Castle was considered a Hirayama-type castle, which is a lowland hill castle. Also, by the way, I know it sounds like the noise a cat makes, but the castle is Miyao, or if you spell it in English, Miyao. But the castle took about 1,000 men a month to build. It wasn't a particularly strong fortification, but it was fortified with stone walls. Motonari didn't want to make it look completely worthless as a military target. For the small Mori contingent garrisoned at Miyao Castle, whether they knew it or not, it was potentially a death sentence. And you have to think, in a way, even if it wasn't explicitly stated, they had to know on some level that the castle was built for the sole purpose of inviting attack from Harukata and the Ouchi. Now at this point, Motonari reached deep into his bag of tricks and had the lord of Sakurao Castle, Katsura Motozumi, send secret correspondence to Sue Harukata pledging his support. This was a very shrewd move on Motonari's part. If you remember from last episode, Motozumi's father, Katsura Hirohide, had rebelled against Motonari about 30 years before during the succession dispute, and was forced to commit suicide. And this made Motozumi's treachery all the more believable. This correspondence led Harukata to believe that he would have the support of Sakurao Castle and control of the inland sea around Miyajima. And to further entice Harukata, Motonari went so far as to employ some reverse psychology and made it known among his retainers that he was worried that Miyao Castle on Miyajima couldn't hold out against attack. And as he predicted, word of this got back to Sue Harukata. Sure enough, in September, Sue fell straight into the trap. He landed with the bulk of the Ouchi army on Miyajima and attacked Miyao Castle just the way Motonari had planned. With Miyao firmly under siege, the island had been secured. And so Harukata threw up a few fortifications on a part of the island known as Tonooka to plan his next moves. From his point of view, the capture of Miyajima was a strategic boon. From this springboard, secured by Sakurao Castle on the mainland, he could embark to almost any point along the Aki coast, as well as Bingo. And at this point, Motonari held his cards close to the vest and assumed a largely defensive posture, and so Sue had reason to feel comfortable in his new forward headquarters. And this is exactly what Motonari had been hoping for. What Harukata didn't realize was the strategic advantage of Sakurao Castle was an illusion. Motonari called on the support of his naval allies, the Murakami pirates and their leader, Murakami Torayoshi. Gathering the pirates' naval strength, he set in motion his plans for Miyajima in what would result in probably one of the most epic battles in Japanese history. On the night of the first day of the 10th month, in a driving thunderstorm, Motonari and his sons put to sea from Sakurao Castle, approximately 2 miles due north of Miyajima. This was a risky proposition during a storm, but guaranteed that Harukata wouldn't be expecting it. It was a necessary risk because the Mori were still outnumbered. And in fact, estimates put the odds against the Mori at best around 2-1, and at worst with the Mori having somewhere around 5,000 troops and about 120 ships, and Sue Harukata is traditionally credited with about 30,000 Ouchi troops. Although modern scholars put the actual number of troops on the island at the time of the battle at probably around 8,000. But suffice it to say, the Mori were somewhere between outnumbered and, straight up Okehazama territory. Kobayakawa Takakage sailed along the mainland coast to the southwest past Miyao Castle, while Motonari and his other two sons, Takamoto and Kikkawa Motoharu, sailed to the southeast and landed under the cover of the storm about a quarter mile to the southeast of Miyao Castle at Tsutsumigaura Beach. I'll try to describe the map, but I recommend if you can, pull up Miyajima Island on Google Maps. Miyajima is a rectangular island that runs parallel to the mainland from northeast to southwest, and at its closest point is about 1,000 feet off the mainland coast, although it may have been a bit further back than before the urban development. Sakurao Castle is 2 miles due north of the northeastern corner of Miyajima, so sailing south from Sakurao, turning to the southwest puts you in front of the castle, which was the path taken by Kobayakawa troops, and you can also cut to the southeast around the tip of Miyajima to end up behind the castle, which is how Motonari, Takamoto, and Motoharu were able to sneak up on the Ouchi troops. Takakage sailed about a quarter mile past Miyao Castle as a distraction, hugging the mainland shore, and then doubled back around and landed at dawn, blowing conch shells to signal the attack. Takakage's men charged the castle, attacking the Sue forces head-on practically in the shadow of Miyajima's Great Torii Gate. At the same time, in a coordinated attack, Kikkawa Motoharu and Motonari's troops attacked Sue Harukata's troops from behind from the southeast. The Ouchi troops took massive casualties before a weak defense line was put together to slow the Mori attack, but this really just delayed the inevitable. The Ouchi army was pushed to the beach and into the Kobayakawa spears. Sue's men desperately fled for the boats, many of them drowning or being cut down by spears and arrows. Meanwhile, the Murakami pirates systematically attacked and sank any ships that broke from the shore. Harukata himself was able to break away from the main battle and fled to the east along the beach, but with Mori soldiers on his heels, he was forced to commit suicide with the last of his officers at the small cove of Oe no Ura. His remains were eventually transported back to Sakurao Castle after the battle, and after a positive ID, were given a proper burial at a nearby Buddhist temple. In all, it took about 2 days for the Mori forces to hunt down and eliminate the remaining scattered Ouchi troops on the island. For Motonari, the Battle of Miyajima was utterly decisive. But there was still some cleanup to be done, not least of which was the island of Miyajima itself. Extensive Shinto purification rituals had to be performed to cleanse the island of the spiritual pollution of 4,700 dead Ouchi soldiers. Not only were the dead removed from the island, but barrels of blood-soaked sand were also removed from the island. And on top of that, the Mori clan kept its moral obligations to the shrine by funding renovation projects over the next few years to assist in the upkeep of the shrine. With the battle won and the Ouchi critically weakened, Motonari wasted no time in moving on Suo and Nagato provinces, starting the invasion within about 2 weeks of securing Miyajima. Combat was constant, and the Mori engaged in various skirmishes, battles, and sieges to mop up the remains of the resistance. One notable siege at Kureikakeyama Castle in Suo province stands out as particularly brutal. But I guess it was probably status quo, but we just happen to have the details in this case. When Motonari's army arrived at Kureikakeyama Castle, the lord of the castle, Sugi Takayasu, immediately promised to surrender. However, one of his generals by the name of Sugi no Mori exposed Takayasu's collusion with Ouchi Yoshinaga, so Motonari rescinded his offer of peace and immediately attacked the castle. In the end, Takayasu and almost 1,400 of his retainers and soldiers lay dead. Sugi no Mori, on the other hand, made out pretty well, going on to serve the Mori clan and actually adopt Motonari's son Motoaki as his own. Motoaki would go on to become the lord of Gassan Toda Castle in Izumo province. But even with all this, the Ouchi were still not done. It would take the Mori another 2 years to deal with Ouchi Yoshinaga. Yoshinaga petitioned Otomo Soren to provide military backup to help him re-establish the Ouchi clan, but Soren had already signed a secret peace treaty with the Mori and declined to assist him. Basically, he was throwing his son to the wolves. With the Otomo clan out of the picture, Motonari invaded Suo province in the 3rd month of 1557 and attacked Yoshinaga at Konomine Castle in Yamaguchi. Yoshinaga was forced to abandon the castle with the last of his key retainers, including Naito Takayo, who led the group to his castle, Katsuyama Castle in Nagato province. Motonari immediately attacked Katsuyama Castle, but the defenses proved to be too much for him, and they were unable to breach the walls. So Motonari took a different approach. He dispatched his retainer, Fukubara Sadatoshi, to negotiate. The deal he presented to Naito Takayo was that if he committed suicide, his lord Yoshinaga would be spared. So, on the 2nd day of the 4th month, Naito Takayo committed seppuku, and the castle gates were opened. And as promised, Yoshinaga was allowed to live, and he was sent to a Buddhist temple, and the Naito clan, under new management, became vassals of the Mori clan. Unfortunately for Yoshinaga, a mere day or two later, Motonari had the temple surrounded and forced him to commit seppuku, ending the Ouchi clan for good. And there's an interesting side note here. Naito Takayo was actually a good personal friend of the first Jesuit missionary in Japan, Francis Xavier. Ouchi Yoshinaga and Naito Takayo had deeded lands to the Jesuits, but with the Naito now under the Mori clan, Motonari quickly confiscated the Jesuit lands and gave them to the Buddhists, removing the Jesuit base in the former Ouchi lands. And this move paid off when Motonari's alliance with the true Pure Land Buddhists caused problems for Oda Nobunaga years later. It would still take years longer to completely bring the former Ouchi lands of Suo and Nagato under Mori control, but they had a good start. Mori Motonari was now the most powerful daimyo in western Japan, and was able to leverage the infrastructure that had long been in place by the Ouchi clan to tie together and administer his domains. He officially retired in favor of his son Takamoto in 1557 after the death of Ouchi Yoshinaga, although he retained substantial authority over most clan affairs. Also, to solidify Mori clan control over their domains, Motonari re-established the oaths that you'll remember from last episode, where he had 23 retainers sign in 1550. But now he expanded it to a full 237 retainers, and also added stipulations that any clan that conducted war in the Mori domain that was not sanctioned by the Mori clan would be punishable by death. and any retainers who were called to battle but failed to appear would be reprimanded and potentially punished by death. Up to this point, Motonari was recognized as a regional power, but after crushing the Ouchi and establishing his full administrative and coercive authority over his lands, he had become a true Sengoku daimyo. The next 5 years or so were occupied with reorganizing the newly acquired Ouchi territories. Administrative stuff, replacing the existing managerial structure, appointing new local representatives, beheading former leadership, counting the rice fields, all the important stuff that one does when they take over their enemy's territory. Part of this consolidation and legitimization of his rule over the old Ouchi territories was done through the emperor himself. In 1560, Motonari reached out to the emperor in Kyoto and gifted rice for the banquet for the succession of Emperor Ogimachi. In return, Ogimachi bestowed on Motonari the titles of Mutsunokami and Daizen Taifu, and these titles helped to add to his legitimacy as a provincial daimyo. Meanwhile, we seem to have forgotten all about the Amako clan. While all this was going on, Amako Haruhisa made inroads into Iwami province, allying with the Ogasawara clan and gaining control of the silver mines there. So the Amako were still active behind the scenes. As for the Mori, the peace treaty between them and the Otomo clan seems to have fallen apart, and they went to war in northern Kyushu. Fighting in northern Kyushu centered around Moji Castle, a vital stronghold in the extreme northern tip of Buzen province. Moji Castle would change hands a number of times until finally being secured by Takamoto in 1561. While Takamoto was dealing with the Otomo, Motonari began moving on Iwami province, and in 1560, Honjo Tsunemitsu abandoned the Amako clan and joined the Mori, critically weakening the Amako clan's influence. Much like Motonari himself, Tsunemitsu had changed sides a number of times over the years between the Ouchi and Amako, and in 1562, in a bit of irony, Motonari had him murdered to avoid being betrayed himself. My guess is that Motonari saw a bit of himself in Tsunemitsu. Amako Haruhisa died suddenly in the first month of 1561, leaving his weaker son Yoshihisa to carry on the struggle with the Mori. Yoshihisa failed to back up the Amako retainers in Iwami province, and so in 1562, control of the silver mines there reverted back to the Mori clan. Motonari took full advantage of Yoshihisa's indecisiveness. He made peace with the Otomo again, with help from the Noshima Murakami pirates, who were actually given the job by the shogun, which freed up the bulk of Motonari's forces to push into Izumo province, the traditional homeland of the Amako clan, and move to cut Gassan Toda Castle off from its supply lines. While Motonari pushed into Izumo to take out the Amako clan once and for all, his eldest son Takamoto died while traveling from Kyushu, where he had been dealing with the Otomo clan. He was on his way to Izumo to assist his father, and died on the trip while staying at the mansion of Wachi Saneharu in Bingo province. No specific cause of Takamoto's death was ever given, but foul play was definitely suspected, as Takamoto had fallen ill shortly after dinner. The suddenness of his death does make it appear that he was poisoned, although in all fairness, food poisoning or bad shellfish could have been to blame. We really don't know, but regardless of the cause, Motonari was sufficiently suspicious of Wachi, or maybe just pissed, to have both him and his younger brother murdered some years later, although his son was spared and the Wachi house was allowed to continue. It's interesting to point out that a lot of daimyo were willing to sacrifice their kids for the greater good. Takeda Shingen and Tokugawa Ieyasu come to mind. But that wasn't Motonari's thing, and he was crushed by the news of the death of his oldest son. But he also wasn't really in a position to take the time to mourn, so he quickly named Takamoto's young son Terumoto as the heir to the Mori clan, and in the meantime continued to rule and took full charge of the Izumo campaign. He ramped up his efforts in a major push in 1564. In order to isolate the main Amako stronghold of Gassan Toda, the Mori sieged Shiraga Castle, a vital castle in Izumo held by Matsuda Michihisa. An Amako general, Yamanaka Yukimori, was dispatched with 200 mounted warriors to relieve the garrison. Yukimori's efforts failed, but he became well known for his bravery and ferocity in battle, and later on would become a legend in the history of the Amako clan, so he'll make an appearance later. The castle surrendered after 70 days when its water supply was cut. Michihisa committed suicide, but his son Masayasu escaped. With the fall of Shiraga Castle, Gassan Toda was effectively cut off. Motonari took the initiative to lead his 15,000 men onto the Amako Castle in the spring of 1564 and set up his headquarters about 2 miles away. At this point, Yoshihisa was heavily outnumbered and facing starvation, and in April, the Mori launched an all-out attack on the castle. Surprisingly, despite the dwindling supplies, Yoshihisa was able to mount an effective defense led by Yamanaka Yukimori. Yukimori led a contingent of warriors out of the castle where they clashed with Kikkawa Motoharu's men, and inflicted enough casualties that Motonari was forced to withdraw and regroup to a position about 15 miles from Gassan Toda, and the Amako won a temporary reprieve. Temporary, because Motonari came back about 5 months later to finish the job with a plan to starve Gassan Toda Castle into submission. To that end, Motonari let it be known that the Mori would execute any castle deserters, which effectively kept everyone within the walls of the castle eating up supplies, literally. It was at this time that one of the Mori men, Shinagawa Masakazu, challenged Yamanaka Yukimori to a one-on-one duel. Contrary to popular belief, by this time in Japanese history, one-on-one duels were pretty much unheard of. This was a thing of the past. But both opposing daimyo agreed, probably hoping it would rally their armies. The site chosen for this fight was a small island in the middle of the Toda River, which ran past the Amako castle. It should be mentioned at this point that Yamanaka Yukimori was also known as Shikanosuke, and the shika in the title can be read as deer, and Yamanaka accordingly wore a helmet adorned with deer antlers. Prior to their duel, Shinagawa mocked him by changing his own name to Okaminosuke, or Wolf, declaring the wolf will kill the deer. Mori and Amako's sources differ on the specifics, but it seems that Masakazu, who was known for his great strength and skill with a bow, intended to kill Yukimori with an arrow. But when the two warriors met with the Mori and Amako representatives who set the ground rules before the fight, the Amako general Akiyage Munenobu declared that a proper duel was done with swords, not a bow, and he cut Masakazu's bowstring. Both warriors made their way to the small island in the middle of the river under the attentive gaze of both armies. So now we have two warriors, each representing their army, ready to fight to the death. For both men, this was probably the absolute pinnacle of their experience. Win or lose, their names would be known throughout history. And me talking about them 470 years later in a country that didn't even exist when they stepped onto that island is proof of the fact. Both men drew their swords and began to circle each other. Masakazu lunged first in an attempt to leverage his greater size and strength, but Yamanaka, who was the better swordsman, avoided the blow and quickly got the upper hand. During a clash of swords, Yamanaka grappled his foe to the ground and killed him with his knife. He cut off Masakazu's head, and holding it up for both armies to see, he shouted, "The deer has killed the wolf," and the Amako men erupted in cheers. The Mori, on the other hand, were pissed.
味方を目の前で撃たれて、このままにして帰ることはできない。Yukimoriを逃がすな。
Some number of Mori forces charged the island, intent on killing Yukimori. Fortunately for him, Tachihara Hisatsuna rained down gunfire and arrows on the Mori forces from the castle, breaking their charge, and Yukimori was able to escape back inside the castle. At this point, Motonari tried one more attack on the castle and then again retreated. A few months later, in the first month of 1566, Uyama Hisakane, a vassal of Yoshihisa, was accused of treason. Yoshihisa had him publicly executed in the castle courtyard. It's actually believed that somehow Motonari framed Hisakane, possibly by forging letters and allowing them to be captured by the enemy. Regardless, however it happened, this wrecked the morale of the already starving defenders, and the bulk of the Amako army surrendered, including Amako Yoshihisa himself. Yoshihisa was exiled to a temple in Aki province, where Motonari could keep an eye on him, and the Amako were effectively removed as a major power. And as for Yamanaka Yukimori, probably due to his extensive exploits during the battle, he was allowed to leave the castle unharmed and parted ways with his former lord. But that actually wasn't the last the Mori would hear of Yukimori. Later that same year, Otomo Sorin decided to attack the island of Shikoku, directly to the south of Aki province across the inland sea. He made a push into Iyo province on Shikoku, teaming up with the Ichijo clan of Tosa province to attack the Saionji clan. Other clans also got into the fight, including the Murakami and the Kono. But things weren't going well for them, and the Murakami reached out to the Mori clan for help. Both the Murakami and the Kono were allied with the Mori. The Murakami had assisted Motonari during the Battle of Miyajima, and the head of the Kono clan, Kono Michinobu, was married to Shishido Takaie's daughter, who was actually Motonari's granddaughter. Motonari really felt he owed the Murakami for their help against Sue Harukata at Miyajima, so he put Kobayakawa Takakage in charge of the operation. Meanwhile, in Kyushu to the south, the Ryuzoji clan began an invasion of Otomo Sorin's lands, and Motonari, always wanted to take advantage of a good situation, made another big push into northern Kyushu. He engaged in heavy combat with Otomo Sorin, eventually capturing the Otomo castle of Tachibana in Fukuoka in 1569 after battering it with western cannons. Around this time, Otomo Sorin made an alliance with the heir to the Amako clan, Amako Katsuhisa, who was a great-grandson of Amako Tsunehisa, and his supporters, Tachibara Hisatsuna, Kumagai Shinzaemon, and Yamanaka Yukimori. Yep, he's back. Amako Katsuhisa and his supporters had been building support for the revival of the Amako clan since the fall of the clan in 1566, and had developed a strong enough power base to invade Izumo province by 1569. At the beginning of the invasion, they had about 3,000 men, but as they moved into Izumo province, warrior houses that had been formerly loyal to the Amako began flocking back to the Amako banners, and this invasion force eventually swelled to 6,000. Meanwhile, Gassan Toda Castle in Izumo was isolated while the bulk of the Mori forces were fighting in Kyushu and Shikoku. The lord of Gassan Toda was Motonari's fifth son Motoaki, who was barely 14 years old at the time. And you'll remember that he was the son adopted into the Sugi no Mori clan. Motonari had assigned the capable general Amano Takashige to Gassan Toda Castle to look after Motoaki. At the time of the Izumo invasion, Mori forces were heavily occupied elsewhere, so Gassan Toda Castle had been left with a skeleton crew of a mere 300 men to hold the castle, and these 300 men were in the path of a massive invasion force. After consulting with Motoaki, Takashige sent a letter of surrender to the invading Amako army, offering to open the gates and give up the castle. Amako Katsuhisa obviously wasn't going to pass up on the chance to retake his family's castle by way of an easy surrender, so he dispatched his general Akiyage Munenobu to take possession of Gassan Toda Castle with 2,000 soldiers. When Munenobu arrived, as expected, he found the castle gates thrown open, and so the army marched triumphantly into the castle. As they marched through the castle, more than one soldier must have noticed it seemed oddly deserted. There was no one around. But they marched deep into the back of the castle to the San no Maru, where instead of meeting with Motoaki and Takashige to accept surrender, they were met with a brutal barrage of musket fire and arrows. The 300 Mori men had been hiding along the walls of the castle and opened fire on Takashige's orders. Munenobu's men were broken under the intense fire and scattered in the chaos, fleeing the castle and leaving a significant number of dead behind. Yamanaka Yukimori himself personally came back with 1,000 soldiers intent on taking the castle. They gathered at the Joanji temple at the castle town to prepare for the siege. Word of this staging area got back to Takashige, who snuck out of the castle with a full complement of gunners and archers and surrounded the temple. Before Yukimori knew what was happening, Takashige gave the order to open fire, and Takashige's men bombarded the temple with bullets and arrows, again breaking the will of the enemy troops. Takashige's men were able to retreat back to the castle unharmed. Yukimori eventually gave up the idea of a siege, seeing as he was stymied at every turn and began to retreat back to his main army. But the scrappy little garrison at Gassan Toda Castle wasn't done with him yet. A Mori warrior by the name of Kojiro charged out of the gates with 80 mounted warriors and began pursuit. Ultimately, they were called back to the castle and didn't actually engage with the Amako forces, but it was still a badass move. Meanwhile, Motonari, who had now been forced to abandon Kyushu to deal with this issue, marched into Izumo with Kobayakawa Takakage and Kikkawa Motoharu, and defeated the Amako army. Yamanaka Yukimori and Amako Katsuhisa fled, but were no longer a threat. Also, with the Mori departure, allies in Kyushu began defecting to the Otomo clan, effectively ending the Mori interest in the south. So with the balance of power between the Shimazu clan, Otomo clan, and Mori clan stable as rivals but not hostile, the Mori clan was able to continue to consolidate and build a power base at home. Motonari lived for 5 more years, passing away at the age of 74 at Koriyama Castle, having become one of the greatest warlords of mid-16th century Japan. Under his leadership, the Mori clan had expanded from a few districts in Aki province to rule over 10 of Chugoku's 11 provinces. Motonari was known even in his day as a master of wiles and trickery and a warlord whose schemes won as many battles as his soldiers, and some of his greatest victories had been against numerically superior foes and involved bold action and shrewd strategy on Motonari's part. Like a lot of Sengoku warlords, Motonari was unconventional, and it really goes without saying that he wasn't an adherent to the honorable tenets of Bushido. He was never above using trickery and deceit to win, and in a parallel to Nobunaga, Motonari often allied himself with some unconventional allies. For example, the Murakami Pirates, an alliance that would pay dividends for a long time, and a warrior named Inokoda who was part of the untouchable class who led a contingent of warriors in battle for the Mori clan. Like I've said before, it's mostly geography that led Oda Nobunaga to take national prominence. But just imagine if things had gone just a little bit different. Doing the research for this podcast, something stood out to me. What would have happened if Ouchi Yoshitaka had moved the capital of Japan to Yamaguchi before Harukata had rebelled? I mean, the actual move was already in the works and potentially only months away when Harukata rebelled. What would have happened if the capital had moved and then Harukata rebelled? I mean, assuming that the move of the capital didn't change his mind or plans somehow, most likely things would have played out similarly, with the Mori clan crushing the Sue Ouchi forces, but instead of simply consolidating a hold on Ouchi lands, Motonari would also be holding the capital of Japan, and the emperor would be under his patronage. If this one event had played out like this, we might have been looking at an accelerated amassing of power and control and a potential Mori shogunate. Or maybe a Sekigahara-like battle between the Mori clan and one of the eastern clans, possibly the Oda. There's really no way of knowing what might have happened, but it's interesting to speculate on how close the Mori might have come to becoming the national power in Japan. After Motonari was gone, the Mori clan, which he built from the ground up, would play a role in the national stage for the next 300 years. The Mori clan would eventually make peace with Toyotomi Hideyoshi and become trusted vassals. Motonari's grandson, Terumoto, was appointed as one of the 5 regents by Hideyoshi to administer the country until his son Hideyori became old enough to rule. Of course, that wouldn't actually happen because of the Battle of Sekigahara, the battle that would solidify Tokugawa Ieyasu as shogun. When the eastern and western factions started forming in the lead-up to the Battle of Sekigahara, Terumoto threw in his lot with Ishida Mitsunari and was named the commander of the Western Army. Terumoto displayed little enthusiasm for his new role and failed to grasp the reins of command, vacillating even as his chief commanders argued and Tokugawa Ieyasu called the eastern forces to arms. Ishida Mitsunari finally told Terumoto to take up residence in Osaka Castle and just stay there, making Terumoto's command of the Western Army in name only. The error of this decision would become evident when the massed forces of East and West met at Sekigahara. The combined Mori faction, to include Mori Terumoto, Mori Hidemoto, and Kikukawa Hiroie, was the largest contingent in Ishida's army, but in the actual battle, it barely moved an inch. Sulking in Osaka Castle, Terumoto had been convinced by Kikukawa Hiroie that the best course of action now was to do nothing, indicating that both considered Ishida a lost cause, or at least one not worth fighting for. Kikukawa let this reach Ieyasu, who suggested that inaction would bring rewards if the eastern forces won. In the event, things kind of worked out differently. Although Tokugawa had initially indicated that he would honor his unofficial understanding with Kikukawa, this seems to have been solely to coax Terumoto into surrendering the powerful Osaka Castle. Terumoto and Hiroie's inaction at Sekigahara probably had a hand in Ishida Mitsunari's loss at Sekigahara, but another Mori clan member, Kobayakawa Takakage's adopted son, Kobayakawa Hideaki, is universally credited with costing Mitsunari the battle. Hideaki, who was on the battlefield that day, eventually betrayed Mitsunari and fought on the side of Tokugawa Ieyasu, causing other key lords to follow suit. This betrayal turned the tide of the battle, and the Tokugawa won the day. Once the campaign had been wrapped up and Osaka Castle was safely in Tokugawa hands, Ieyasu declared that it was the duty of a warrior to fight, especially the so-called commander of an army. The Mori lands were severely reduced, and in a move that might as well have been out of cruel humor, some of these traditional Mori lands were transferred to the Kikukawa clan, and in what must have been a particularly bitter pill, the Mori clan was forced to give up Aki province altogether. In the end, Terumoto was left with estates worth about 360,000 koku. But he was also left with his head. He had survived after all, but with a 75% reduction in his holdings. And with that, Terumoto went on to shave his head and become a monk. But in a sense, later on the Mori clan would have their revenge. Despite all that happened, the Mori clan would endure as leaders in Nagato province, otherwise known as Choshu domain, and would never forget how they were treated by Tokugawa Ieyasu after Sekigahara. In fact, it became tradition over the centuries for the Mori leaders when they got together for meetings to start it with, "Is it time to overthrow the shogunate?" or something along those lines. But the answer always seemed to be no, until about 260 years later, when the Mori clan would play a key role in the mayhem that would result in the overthrow of the Tokugawa shogunate. So let's end this here with a quote from a scroll commissioned by Motonari's eldest son Takamoto for his father in the early 1560s.
He rules over 12 provinces and controls over 10,000 troops. Ah, what prosperity! His power expands over the sea, his fame reaches the clouds, and in full solemnity he attends the emperor's royal ceremonies. He assists his emperor to rule like the ancient Chinese emperors of yore. He fathoms his master's teachings and penetrates the profound thoughts in them. He has close contacts with all people and selects the most talented men to administer his territory. When he holds the family sword and subjugates the enemy, his wisdom tempers the best of swords. When he waves a fan and commands garrisons, it is as if he consults with the ancient Chinese military strategists. He loves to praise courageous men of loyalty and valor. His brave tiger face recalls the ambition of Chinese General Ban Chao. His porcupine hair resembles the beautiful beard of Commander Wan Wen. The triple stars of his family crest add brightness to his beautiful abode. The family crests of the generations of the powerful and rich decorate his military tent. He recites and composes Japanese poems. As a connoisseur of old books, he enjoys many different editions of poetry, anthologies, to visit the ancient steps of early Japanese poetry. With devotion he makes the reading of Buddhist scriptures his daily task, a sign of sincere faith in the Buddha. His allies always believe in his words. Being good to neighbours is a precious virtue, and a man of virtue will never be alone.
And that's it for this episode of the Samurai Archives podcast. Again, be sure to check out patreon.com/Samurai Archives to see how you can support this podcast. And consider giving a favorable review to whatever platform you use to listen to this podcast. And lastly, I'd like to give a shout out to Patreon supporter Patrick Stewart. Thanks for your support. It's extremely appreciated. And thanks to all our patrons. All right, and with that, we are at the end. See you next time.